This is an analysis final chapter, final PowerPoint on how do we put all of our statistics together for statistics class for criminal justice. So what tests do we use? It all depends on the type of data that you are using in your research. So after you have gone through all of your steps, you have decided the problem which you start with, you've decided your research questions, you've conceptualized, you now have your hypothesis, and when you have your hypothesis is when you're going to decide what test you use, because you're going to have your independent variables from your hypothesis. So what we're going to look at is the type of data will affect the statistical procedure that you will use for your study. Now, if you're using an independent variable, go back, you are using an independent variable. Is your independent variable nominal or interval and ratio? So that's your first question. Nominal is categorical. So does it have two categories? Does it have more than two categories? Does it have, meaning the categories or the groups of that variable? For instance, is it gender? Gender only has two categories, male or female. Race has more than two categories. Hair color has more than two categories. Socioeconomic status has more than two categories. Income level has more than two categories. If you put those income levels into groups, so if you group 0 to 20,000, 21 to 50,000, 51 to 75, and so on, those are categories. So it just depends on, that's the first thing you need to decide. So right now, take a minute, look at the types of variables that you are using in your study and write that down. Now, if you're using an interval, if your variables, your independent variable is interval or ratio, then you're going to use correlation or multiple regression. And we're going to go into these. But interval or ratio, so remember what these are. Interval means that there's a equal space between each one. Ratio means you have a true zero. So you might have a sentence length would be a ratio. Interval, the best interval example is degrees, where 0 doesn't mean anything. So you're just deciding if it's a numerical ratio, a numerical independent variable. So is your independent variable that's numerical, do you have one independent variable or do you have two or more independent variables? Make that determination now on your own data. Now, a little bit more detail. Is your independent variable nominal? If you determine that it is, and you have two categories, you would do a t-test. And an example would be gender has two categories, and you decide to test the number of discipline infractions for juveniles in a specific facility. You would use what is called a t-test. You're testing the means of from the number of discipline infractions between male and female. So two categories, t-test. If you have more than two categories or two groups, you use Anova testing. An example would be to test the level of education for juveniles, which is more than two groups or levels. You might be, and I'm thinking of, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. You're testing their level with the number of discipline infractions for them while in this facility. So you use Anova. So again, if you have a nominal variable, categories, two categories, t-test, more than 2, Anova. Now, is your independent variable interval or ratio? Is it numerical? Now, if you've determined that your independent variable is continuous, how many independent variables do you have? Answer that question. If you have one independent variable, you will use a correlation coefficient. If you have 2 or more independent variables, you'll use a multiple regression analysis. So if you only have one independent variable that is continuous, correlation. An example would be testing whether the length of a juvenile sentence causes the number of infractions to increase or decrease. And remember when we talked about the strength of the relationship? So if the length of a juvenile sentence goes up and the number of infractions goes up, then we have a positive relationship. If the length of a juvenile sentence goes up and the number of infractions decreases, then we have a negative relationship. And we can measure that strength of that relationship by using a Pearson's correlation R or odds ratio. Those are 2 different ways to measure the strength of the relationship between the 2 variables. Now, if you have more than 2 independent variables, you have to use multiple regression. Now, an example would be testing whether the sentence length of the number of priors causes the number of infractions to increase or decrease. So again, testing whether you're testing 2 independent variables. The independent variables are sentence length and number of priors. So do both of these independent variables cause the number of infractions to increase or decrease? Again, you can measure the strength of this relationship between these variables by using Pearson's R or odds ratio. And remember again, if one goes up and the other goes down, it's what type of relationship? I hope you said negative. Now, a big question that I think everybody has is, why are you even having to learn statistics in criminal justice? Why are we even doing statistics? Nobody likes to do statistics at this level. Let me find you something else. Statistics is necessary for being good stewards of all the information at the practitioner's fingertips. The practitioner, which is you or the person you're doing the study for. There are many programs and interventions available within the criminal justice system. Research into the effectiveness of these programs can help agencies determine which programs they want to use, which ones do they want to continue, which ones do they want to stop. Statistics is a vital part of this process, but the statistics have to be accurate and they have to measure what they intended to measure, the validity. With statistics, there is no support for a program. Anecdotal evidence, which is evidence we simply see with our eyes, like for instance eyewitness testimony, is often wrong. Often. So, what we're looking for is a good statistical analysis that's based on methodology that is sound and well planned. That's why we spend so much time on the methodology of the research. The sound methodology is driven by carefully made theoretical model and conceptual framework, our sampling frame, our hypothesis around our theory. These are all the methodology that you're using. Theory needs statistical analysis to support the application. It doesn't mean anything if you just make a statement without any support. This is how we make decisions about programs and our responses within the juvenile system. Every program relies on the empirical data to make decisions, what to change. Do we need to, it's the same reason when we looked in the 1990s about increasing criminal punishment. It was because the professionals looked at the statistics that they were given, showing that crime rate was going up and punishments were too lax. So by increasing punishment, the hope was to decrease crime, which is what type of relationship? A negative relationship. Theory without some kind of support, whether you use a qualitative or a quantitative statistical method, is little more than armchair philosophizing. It's not worth anything. It's anybody can say anything. So theory becomes more plausible and perceived as more scholarly when some level of empirical support is provided. So when you have that data to support what you say, you are going, it's more scholarly, it's more accepted. Your peers will accept it, the programs will accept it. How many times have you heard in the criminal justice degree program here at King, support your work with data and research? Just saying something doesn't make it true. So statistics bring theory to the application. Again, why do you have to use stats in criminal justice? If you're going to work as a probation officer or you're going to become a lawyer, why do you need stats? If you're going to work in the criminal justice system in any capacity, you will see this material again. If you're charged with collecting stats for your organization, and I know that we have somebody in class that's been charged with doing that, you will need to know what these statistics mean, or at least what statistics might need to be used to test your data. And it can also help you to understand the articles that you read in criminal justice. If you at least understand why a t-test was done, and that you had a t-test because you were looking at one independent variable, then it just helps you to understand more of what was being studied. And it will provide you with a basis of understanding that will help you complete a graduate program. This is the basis that you need when you move into a graduate program. You'll go into a lot more depth on these statistics, but it's good to just have a basic knowledge of what they are.